Showcast. We will be introducing the field of organizational behavior. I'm Kayla from Edgewood College, and I'm here with Professor Alex Stajkovic from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So just a few technical points before we dive into the content.
Well, first, we both teach OB, so this presentation will not be all that formal or scripted where we read on the other monitor what's written, but rather, or hopefully, it will be more authentic and spontaneous as we typically do in our classrooms.
The second point is that this podcast is intended for anyone interested in learning more about OB, but also if you're a professor or a teacher and you are now forced to put everything online and you're looking for content to make available to your students, because we're in April 2020 in the middle of the COVID-19 crisis, there are no permissions needed. Feel free to share this, use this for your classes. With that, we will get into the outline of our talk today.
Okay, let's get into the weeds here a little bit. So we'll start with the definitions, but we'll start with informal definitions, sort of like what is the story of OB. And from there, we will go into more formal stuff, and that will include the conversational levels of analysis, conceptual backgrounds, and topics associated with those backgrounds.
Then we're going to talk about several examples. So we're going to cover some of the classic findings in OB. I think this is one of my favorite parts of this course. It's very interesting. And then we're going to cover the epistemology of knowledge creation, or how do we create knowledge in the field of OB. Yes.
So now we have implications at the end. The last few slides are dedicated to practical takeaways of studying OB. Why is that so helpful to managers? And sort of talking a little more specifically, why, what's good for you, what's in it for you to take an OB class.
So starting with an informal description of organizational behavior. So OB is the study of various factors that influence how people behave in organizations. Now, many people feel they have an intuitive understanding of OB because they have practical work experience.
That's exactly the problem with common sense views, which is they're partly right at times, but they're misleading often enough to get employees, teams, and organizations into trouble. Insight, please. So we have several questions here that we would like to ask you to sort of answer intuitively. And they're pet peeves of OB instructors, because they nicely illustrate the differences between common sense and what the research shows. So the first one is the happy worker is a productive worker, right? We like happy people, we'd have them rather than grumps. So of course they must be productive. Well, not quite. That's not what the evidence is supporting. They're happy, that's for sure. But think about it. If you're happy, you already have everything, right? You are happy. So you're going to go and bust your rear end tomorrow morning? I'm not so sure. You're going to be satisfied. You're going to be nice. You're going to be friendly. You're going to be cordial. People are going to want to be around you. But no, that does not translate in being productive in the workplace.
The second one on here, always do your best in pursuing a goal. So this was something I grew up with. My mom would always tell me, just do your best, just do your best, just do your best. But we know from goal theory and the related literature that setting a do your best goal is essentially the same as having no goal at all. Goals should be specific, difficult, time-bound, and quite challenging.
And what's the acronym of that again?
I think in our book we called it STD, specific, time-bound, and difficult goals.
Okay, and more serious topics. Keep pay levels secret in an organization. No, don't. Because if you do, people are going to figure out that they have same seniority, different pay, conspiracy theories are going to come up, people are going to get upset. I think you had a good example from your experience.
Absolutely, yeah. So I worked for a large insurance company, and it was we were told, do not share your salary or pay information with anyone else. And it created a lot of tension because you wondered what people made when it came out that they made more than you, perhaps, for the same level. There was definitely hostility.
Didn't you have a more personal example with some coworker of yours or something?
Yeah, So
well, tell her. You don't have to share personal.
Sure. So I was hired in, and this person had been there a few months before me, but we were both at the associate level. And eventually, I found out that he made $9,000 more than me per year. And he would straight up tell me that he only worked about 6 hours a day. He was not putting into the same level, and it was just very upsetting once you learned that. So A lot of organizations tout transparency, yet they're out there telling their employees to keep these things
course.
secret. So
the next one is high job satisfaction leads to high performance. Of course. Well, no, it doesn't. So we studied this for about 100 years. And about the highest correlation we had is 0.14, which I think that's about less than 2% of the variance accounted for. Why? Well, the same reason. Now, if you think about it, how can you be satisfied at your job, about your job, if your performance sucks? It just doesn't make sense. So what Lyman Porter, one of the founders of the field, did, he said it was probably the other way around, that the high performance leads to high job satisfaction. You perform well, now you're satisfied about that versus... So satisfaction is a great variable, right? You want to be job satisfied. It leads to organizational commitment, voluntary turnover, less frictions with management. So it's a great variable to have, except does not lead to high performance.
Interesting. The next one, so of course we would say height's not correlated with success, right? Interestingly enough, and good news for those of us who happen to be a little bit taller, it actually is.
No wonder you're answering that question. Good. Yeah, go ahead.
So correlated here being the key word, right? It doesn't cause success, but we do find the correlation with height and success.
For 100 years, it gets repeated over and over. So you look at just literally height, and here's some index of success in life, and it's there. Again, it's not causality, but it's there. And the last one is that negative reinforcement is as effective as positive reinforcement. And that's like, yeah, sure it is. So, no, it's not. I mean, you can use it for a short period of time. Something happened, or people who are on PIP or PIS, performance improvement plan or performance improvement system. We tried positive reinforcement, doesn't work. Now we're like, listen, it's either going to be this or else, just negative reinforcement. But for how long can you do that? For how long are people? It's basically a threat or a blackmail. For how long are people going to take that? No, they won't. But I think your students kind of react differently.
It's very interesting. So I think probably newer or younger managers think that negative reinforcement is going to be more effective. So when I teach this to undergrads and I ask them, which would you use and which would you prefer to be used on you to increase your motivation, I'd say over 90% say negative reinforcement, which is just really surprising.
Sure. Well, you should tell them that's how you should live your life. You know, you should tell your spouse, listen, honey, I mean, it's, you know, my way or no way. Shape up or ship out. So that's just how it's going to see for how long.
Key there being long term, right? We want employees to stay at organizations. So we're looking at motivation over the long run. So.
Well, use fear. They're going to put their resumes out next week. So that's that. You're going to lose good employees.
Absolutely.
So let's get into a little more formal definition of organizational behavior. So this is kind of how we define it, but it's very, very similar how most of our colleagues would do it. That organizational behavior is a multidisciplinary field, we'll explain that seeks to understand, predict, and manage, which is the same purpose for science, right? What's the purpose of science? Well, to understand, predict, and manage a phenomena. In our case, that's behavior in organizations at the individual, team, and organizational levels of analysis. So why don't you tell us a little bit about levels of analysis, then I'll get into the background.
Sure. So for individual, we are looking at performers who are not working in groups or teams. So we think of bank tellers or individual tax preparers. So how does the employee perform on an individual basis? Now we can take one step back to the group or team level and just quickly, groups are slightly different than teams. So groups might be a group of faculty at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, or the Olympians who are there competing for the US are a group. The difference is their effort is not interdependent. So for teams, we are looking at interdependent effort. So you can think of a basketball team or any team in which what I do affects what my teammate does. So when we study that, we're looking at how those groups or teams perform as a unit. And then we can take even a step back one level farther to the organizational level, which is the macro level, when we're looking at how does the entire unit, so how do all of the departments and all of the teams within the organization come together, and how do they perform as one unit?
Okay, so let me talk a little bit about the backgrounds, and you can start clicking there. Background means where's this coming from, right? This set of topics, and sometimes we call the individual level of analysis micro, basically. So microbe is based on several subdisciplines of psych. So let me just explain a few. The first one, experimental psychology, and most of the findings on learning, motivation, perception are coming from it. Learning, different learning styles. Does everybody learn the same, or do they have their own different individual learning styles? What motivates people at work? Is everybody motivated the same, or do people differ? What makes them tick? Perception, obviously, perception is reality. So whatever the reality is, that's nice, but it's how people perceive it. How do they perceive certain things, and how do they act upon it? The next one is clinical psych, and you might think that that would not be related to organizations, but it is, because most of the research on personality is coming from clinical psych, meaning would your personality contribute to your productivity, or would it be toxic? Would it be pathological? So we embraced the study of personality for a long time, and it's used quite a bit. This entire class could be just personality. A lot of work on resilience, especially during these times. Can you bounce off
I think you have
from
a lot of work
failure?
on that.
Yeah, I've got a few papers on it. Can you bounce off from failure? Work on stress. A lot of that, almost all of that, actually started in clinical psych. Industrial psychology. So that's us. That's an old name. That's the first name of the field. And so this is all linguistics, right? Some call it IO, industrial. Some call it industrial / organizational. We call it organizational behavior. So let me explain that a little. We started as industrial psychology, basically the application of psychology to industry. Mm-hmm. So that's 1890, Frederick Taylor, Mary Parker Follett, Hawthorne studies. And then the field around 1950s, 1960s changed the name to organizational behavior and moved from psychology departments to the business schools. Mm-hmm. So in IO, they were all mostly psychologists with interest in industry. And in our case, we're trained in business, in organizations, but we use psychology as a tool to help organizations to make it more effective. So they started with personnel selection. Whom do we select in? Whom do we select out? Are they qualified? Are they not? Are they fit? Performance assessment. Is it fair? Is it accurate? Does it really portray what people did? A lot of attitude surveys. Attitudes are, of course, important. As we said, job satisfaction, organizational commitment. These are all very, very important variables, and that's how the field started.
So the background on the group think level really goes back to social.
I don't have corona. I'm good.
Yeah, no, he doesn't. Goes back to social psychology. So unlike clinical psychology, social psychology is looking at how do people impact the environment and how does the environment impact people in a social setting. So when we think about topics here, we're looking at socialization. So how do individuals become socialized into groups? Once they're in those groups or teams, what are the different dynamics that can emerge? And then a big one that in our field especially is leadership. Multiple angles here. How do leaders emerge as groups? Which leaders are more effective? How does the leader impact the followers? And so on and so forth.
And another 5 classes on that topic could be taught.
Mm-hmm.
So organizational level, part of it is based on anthropology, mostly social and cultural anthropology, which is culture. Anthro gave us the culture matters, different cultures. Biology is one thing, but then people build these different cultures. Or culture is critically important. Some cultures focused on this, some cultures focused on that. That can create all kinds of different. How do we communicate? It's part of the culture. Do you just spontaneously knock at bosses' doors and ask questions, or does it have to be formal, go through the channels? Do we care about each other? Do we not? Is it everything about achievement, or is it like, yeah, of course, but nonetheless, we're a social system. A lot about symbolism. There are a lot of symbols out there without going into any. When Easter is in 2 days, so take a cross. I mean, a lot of people don't think much about it when they see the cross, or Star of David, or any other symbols like that. If you look at a BMW symbol or Mercedes-Benz, that speaks volumes, portrays kind of like a picture speaks 1,000 words.
Flag.
Yeah, flag. Go. So this is about 7th time I'm kicking her here below. But anyway, sociology is mostly structure and social status. How do social structures, when imposed individuals, how do they work? What effects do they produce? Are they good? Are they not? In organizational settings, probably the first and the maybe the most known ones was Max Weber talking about hierarchical administrative structures that in administrative organizations, if you impose a hierarchical structure that helps, that works, that reduces the variance, and off we go. Social status too. You have high status, low status. No offense to anybody, but everybody today is a VP. That's the idea there. Political science, power, conflict resolution, bargaining, collective bargaining, individual bargaining, economics, anything about markets, basically. So this is the more formal definition, different levels of analysis, different backgrounds in terms of disciplines. But as you can see, it's almost all, so not all, but it's almost all social sciences and some topics associated with it. So let us give you now a few examples, a few classic examples from this research.
So as we mentioned, perception is something that we study. So here's an image you've probably seen before. So just take a few seconds and look at this image. What do you see? Do you see an old woman or a young woman? So likely you see one of those two and you're wondering what in the world I'm talking about. So if you see the old woman here, we can see her nose, her hair. It looks like she's wearing some kind of headscarf and a big furry coat. Looking back at the picture now, you can probably see the old woman. Whereas the young woman, well, if we zoom in, we see she's wearing some sort of choker necklace. She's turned away from the camera. We see her ear, her eyelash, a little bit of her hair with the feather there. So people see things differently, right? And this holds in organizations too. Two people can witness the exact same event or even work for the exact same leader and perceive it to be very different.
So just to say that everybody will perceive the same things, that's just simply borderline ridiculous. So I'm not going to name other social sciences that would say people don't count. They're just a residual, sampling error or error, basically. So it's absolutely ridiculous. You have two people, they see the same thing, they perceive it differently. Not just here. You go to a bar, you go to dinner, you see something, you're there with your spouse, and she sees one thing and you see completely the other thing. So if that's not important, I think we can just close the shop right away.
Right. Well, this next one is really interesting too. Why don't you tell me about
I
this
love
one?
this next one. Just for one thing, it's in social conformity. It's just something I can't stand. I think, conformity is nice, but boy, it can get pretty ridiculous. So Solomon Asch at Yale is basically saying in social psych, people conform like you won't believe it. And unfortunately, it's even worse in organizations because of all the important outcomes out there. I mean, your career depends on your income, so you probably conform even more. So here's what Ash said. They're like, no, people don't conform. They think for themselves, right? Maybe, but they don't. So look at this. So he has a bunch of grad students working with him. So there's 3 or 4 first, and then the last one is the real subject, right? So maybe a 4th person in a row. And the first 3 are faking it, of course. So they want to see how many of those at the 4th place would actually confirm with this. So he told them, it's just experimental visual judgment. Please take a look. You have exhibit 1 to your left, and which one of those to your right, and exhibit 2 matching length. Now, I don't know if you can see it in slides, but it's pretty obvious that it's A, right? I mean, there's no doubt about it unless you have some sort of visually impaired. So what happens is that as the subject comes in, hi, how you doing? Have a seat at number 4. And then he asks his grad students, but the subject doesn't know they're grad students, right? So they're all fake, they're trained. So the first one goes, well, let me see. Exhibit A, right? Well, yeah, I think it matches B to the right. And, it's really hilarious if you watch this on YouTube. Number 4 person's like, what? B? And then, of course, the number 2 and number 3 grad students fake it like that. It's a slightly different story and acting, but yeah, I think it's a B. Yeah, I think it's a B. And then they go to number 4, who's an actual paid subject to participate. So what do you think? To get what percentage of people actually conformed? Huge, about 70%. Nobody would believe it. When they talk to them and say, why in the world would you do that? Well, I don't know what this is about. I'm going to be the only one stupid. If 3 of them thought it's this, it must be that. Maybe something's wrong with me. So there you have it, right? Even though it's obvious, he had a visual judgment on purpose. So it's not like some decision that it's complicated, you're not quite sure. It's quite obvious. And we have 70% of the people conform to something that is obviously incorrect. So there you have it for conformity. And by the way, that gets even worse. I mean, if you look at today's research, Of course, you had Milgram out there with a shock experiment, and just recently I watched a really really awful movie. It was here at the Wisconsin Film Festival. They have a lot of documentaries and stuff like that, and it's called Compliance, and it'll just make your brain throw up if you watch it. I'm not sure I recommend it. It's really heavy, but let's get to the next one.
So the next one, when we're thinking about learning styles, some people are very linguistic learners, right? So here's just an example. I'll give you a second to read it. So
But don't tell them the outcome. Just have them figure it out.
what word from group B can belong to group A and Y? So here you would have linguistic learners perform better on this type of question compared to, say, this type of question, where now we're talking about visualizing an average size Granny Smith in an empty cereal box and how many
Don't tell them that either.
apples that you can fit into it. So this just illustrates a difference in learning styles, which is another topic that we study in OB.
Well, if you think everybody learns the same, and you have a visual learner, and you just push them on a linguistic task, they're not going to be as productive as if there were a fit.
Right.
But anyway, give us the last one. That's the best one. Here's a sheer. Oh, am I doing this one? Okay. So this is a absolute pure creativity, pure liquid IQ. There is no other way, because nobody had experience with this. So just read it. Standing on a bridge, see a boat full of people below. Sure, yet there isn't a single person on board. How can this be? And we use this in our classes, and boy, you would not believe the mores that people go through this. So this is a whole other topic. We can talk about it quite a bit. Left side, right side. Is this creativity? Is it liquid IQ? What is it? But anyway, we're gonna leave you with this one. It's really, really an interesting one, because why is this pure creativity or liquid IQ? Because there's no precedent. Right here, if you visual, you kind of these two should be solved pretty quickly. I mean, there's a pattern. There's a clear pattern. There's no pattern here. Right. There's nothing to go back and say, let me look back at my experiences. None. Let me have logic. There is no logic to this. What is it? I'm looking. There should be a bunch of people that are there, but there's nobody. What is this? Right.
Right.
So it's how you connect the left side, but that's a whole different topic. Creativity is a great topic. It's awesome. And this one is on flow. It's one of my I really like this. So, these are all, whoever you want to call them, affect, emotions, and there's a lot at work. So if you ask a psychologist or a therapist what kind of emotion people have, well, they have all kinds of emotions. Okay, how do we figure them out? Well, we can't. There are just simply too many. Where are they coming from? Well, who knows? It could be the environment. It could be yourself. It could be interactions. It could be they are pathologically this or that. It's impossible. Ego. It's impossible to explain. And then what the researchers in OB found, and it's a beauty and a beautiful example of parsimony, where so much could be explained with two variables. So they basically plotted the skill and challenge at work. So you go with the level of skill from very, very low to high, and you go for low challenge to high challenge. Now look how much this explains. So basically, everybody can relate to this. I know what skill I have, and I know what kind of challenge of a task is. So if you have no skill, no challenge, we're basically dealing with apathy. God bless you. You're sad, you're depressed. We'll try to help you as much as we can. Then you go to the increasing the skill level to content. No content. Content. So yeah, I am more skilled than challenge. Of course I'm content. I feel safe, right? If I feel secure, I'm doing okay. Now you have too much skill and you have too little challenge, you're going to get bored. Mm-hmm. You're not challenged enough, simply. You have it, but nobody's using it. Then you go up on the y-axis. If you go up to worry, that's basically your skill is the same as it was with apathy, meaning not much, but the challenge is going up. So you're like, well, how am I going to do this? I'm supposed to do this, but I don't have any skill to do it. Then anxiety kicks in. Challenge is really, really high, but I have no skill. I'm going to become anxious. What's going to become of me? Yeah. What's going to happen here? And anxiety, fear, basically, of unknown outcomes. And then alertness, arousal, learning is, I'm at a high challenge, but I'm developing my skills. So now I'm interested. I'm challenged, right? I want to go out, and I go out and learn more in order to be able to do it. And then the control is kind of in the middle. you have a lot of skills, some challenge, you're confident in control, but of course the state of flow, the chick sent me high and the others have been talking, you're focused, you're happy, you're in the zone. It's a different topic, but our point here is to show how so many emotions at work could be explained by two variables. All right, so let's get a little more academic in this and talk about the epistemology of OB knowledge creation, which is really how do we create knowledge in OB. So it's also known as a scientific method. So let me kind of explain that in some detail. So that's what we do on our side of things. So everything starts with life. You have a life out there. So what now? Okay. Do we just let it be? Do we try to simplify it? Do we try to find something out of it? Any conclusions? Where are we with that? Practitioners want solid evidence to enhance organizational effectiveness. So the question, of course, for us in OB is how do we go from life to solid evidence that they can use and say, you know what, we have some confidence in these findings. So let's see how do we progress here. So now we need to kind of go from life to these specific empirical and reliable findings. We use what is called scientific method to accumulate knowledge systematically. On the left side here, we have what we call induction, which is you go from specific to general, or it's really an observation. So what did early people do? Hominoids, Homo sapiens, they had life, and then what? They just acted randomly? Well, no, they observed their environment. They try to figure out if there are any patterns in that environment. So that's the big one with induction. Observe, see what's going on, and try to summarize that in certain patterns. Why? Because we can't randomly, it just doesn't make any evolutionary sense that we would randomly behave all the time versus say, hey, we think there's a pattern here that can apply to these different situations. So from there, we get to what's called theory, right? But theory, there's two meanings to it. One is conceptual reasoning, and the other one is a cumulative body of knowledge. So in a conceptual reasoning, that's really, give me some reasoning here. Give me why this should be. Why is this pattern working, right? And how does it work? So this is where we would say in research, give me a model, draw for me, give me boxes and arrows. What are the variables? What are the relationships with them? Which way do errors go? Are they recursive, unidirectional? Are there any mediators? Well, give me the model. Basically, try to tell me what's going on. So let me give you an example, and then we will draw general propositions and specific. I'll explain both. So let's say the people observe that in life, whatever you do, people kind of want to get something for it, especially if they're doing for others. Mm-hmm. Like, what's in it for me? Yeah, sure, but what's in it for me? And it makes a lot of sense, of course, and we know it's true. So a general proposition would be, it looks like the human behavior is contingent upon certain consequences that they believe will receive. It's not a bad proposition, but it's pretty general, right? Human behavior is contingent upon consequences. Okay, but what behavior? Where? In organizations, with your spouse, everywhere. And that's where then we derive specific hypotheses, something testable in this particular experiment. Employees of a certain level of tenure in education will respond in this way to financial, social, or feedback in terms of reinforcers in these following ways. So that would be a specific hypothesis, right? So that would be then what we call deduction, which is start with a theory. What is the general conceptual reasoning? What is logic, right? Give me this model. How does this work? Which was sort of initially built by induction. And then we really get more serious about filling all the cells with deduction, which is empirical testing. So we're going from general, yeah, we know the general human behavior is function of contingent consequences, but now does they work in organizations? To what extent? How? What about money, amounts of money, changing reinforcers? That would all be empirical testing. No. In terms of empirical testing, we can have, we can have an entire PhD on that. We talk different stats. Is it this? Is it that? Do we do this? Do we do that? And then at the end of that process, we have some specific empirical and reliable findings, which is, for example, do best goals suck? And goals need to be specific, difficult, and time bound, or job satisfaction is not really related to performance. And we know that rather empirically. So that's what we do. This picture is what we do on this end. And then once we have those findings like that, then they can go to practitioners to use them and go back to accumulate that body of knowledge even more. So theory means conceptual reasoning, but a lot of people said in this theory, this is what happens, but they mean body of knowledge. And actually, if you don't differentiate the two, it can get you really in trouble at conferences. And I've seen it way, way too many times when this happened. So several things that we need to add here, and it gets more complicated. Now, when I said you got to develop a model, think about it. Well, you can develop the model with all possible links among all possible variables. Not to offend anybody, but every chimp can do that. Well, if I have this many variables, here's all the possible links. Well, the whole point is, can you get more with less? Can you use thinking, logic, theory to be a little more parsimonious, to use less variables and explain the same amount of variance, or at least the amount of variance that is not statistically different from what we call justified or fully identified model, meaning everything is related to everything, right? So parsimony is huge. I mean, you really, really, I at least appreciate people who think parsimoniously. Like, no, here's the less variables to explain more. And how do I know that? Because I think, or I reason, or I use theory, or I use data, rather than just have a guesswork, or in the worst possible case, like, well, I just relate everything to everything and see what happens. Causality, correlations are cute, and that's the beginning, and but it doesn't really, I'm not going to say it doesn't mean anything, but pretty much it doesn't mean anything, right? Many times actually could be, it can create certain views, a certain opinions, a certain tones. It can give hope to people, whatever it is, and it's really, really misleading, right? So correlation means nothing. It's just a pattern of association. So here are some examples of why correlation doesn't really mean much, or at least we cannot rely on it. So shoe size and spelling ability are correlated, hugely, hugely correlated. So if you were to derive causality, you would say, well, the bigger the foot, right, the better your spelling ability, or if you're a better speller, your foot is going to grow. So obviously we both know it's ridiculous. Why is it ridiculous? Because there's a third unmeasured variable that is highly correlated with both, which is age. Right, so age is correlated with both the two. So that's one example where A and B, B and C, A and C are not correlated in a sense, because the variable in the middle. So it's once upon a time in my career, I had this quote from someone that I'm the member of Informal Society for the Suppression of Correlation Coefficient, and I put that in my desk, and people actually thought that I was a member of some society or something. So validities, so even though your model is parsimonious, you are doing experiments, you're trying to do the causality and all that, there is still this issue of validities. There's at least 4 validities or threats to the validities of your studies that you gotta explain, at least in the banter that we have, so-called the review process. Not so-called, but it is the review process, which is there's internal threats to validity, external threats to validity, threats to statistical conclusion validity, and threats to construct validity. Internal is, are you sure that your findings are as valid as you're claiming it to be? So for example, you had 2 groups and one got this treatment and one got that treatment, and you're like, oh yeah, wow, look at this, it doesn't really work. Yet they were allowed to talk. You didn't control for that. They go after work and talk. It's called diffusion of treatment, right? Well, you diffuse the treatment. It doesn't mean so there's 14 of those, right? Good luck explaining all of those. External validity means just because you found it in a lab, does it have any external meaning? Can it generalize to anybody? And whom can this generalize to? So if you have low internal validity, high external validity, typically micro researchers say, well, that doesn't mean anything. What are you generalizing? You shouldn't be generalizing that. And on the other hand, if you have a really, really tight internal validity but doesn't generalize to anyone, question is, what good is that? Is that too? Statistical conclusion is, did you use the right stats, and are you drawing appropriate conclusions from the data? And construct validity is because most of the variables in psych, of course, are psychological, and therefore they require measurement, some sort of assessment. And then, of course, the big question is the construct really representing the measure? Is the measure representing the construct? Now that's where psychometrics comes in, and you got to better make sure that they do, because if you think that these two constructs are related but measures don't represent that, then what you think you're doing is not really what the constructs are doing. I mean, all in all, there's the last one. I think it's cumulative knowledge building, meaning, this is a simple way to put it. Only we're stacking bricks. We just only believe in brick stacking. One brick at a time, not too many bricks, no funny bricks. One thing at a time. You go back to theory, see what has been done, look in those topics and backgrounds. They've done this, they've done that. This is what's left unanswered. Here's the gap. Here's why it's important. Let me fill it. So this whole jumping all over the place or talking. So this is the difference, for example, between consultants or motivational speakers and scientists. They can talk whatever they want to say, but if you talk to science, they're like, where's that coming from? Well, the first question is, where's that coming from? Like, oh, really? We haven't addressed that yet in all these theories? Oh, we have. And it was this, and it works this way, and now you're going to go that way? So you see, we're basically keeping people in line, if you wish. It's like, no, you can have something better, but you better address for all this that we've done before. So that's one of the reasons that German Academy at a time where Einstein was, they wouldn't consider him a scientist. They thought he was some kind of dreamer, because what he stacked was so far out without any bricks in between. They're like, how'd you get to this? And you're like, well, I kind of did, sort of, right? I envisioned these things. Like, well, no, that's not how it works. You got to stack up the bricks and get to that. That's what science does. You're some kind of dreamer. I mean, it's kind of, they didn't even give him the Nobel for relativity. They gave him for the molecules. So anyway, that's what we do. That's kind of, I know it might become a little, but this is your 6 years of a PhD, right? On top of the 2 years of the master's studies.
So then moving into some practical implications of studying OB. So we could say that one non-negotiable aspect of organizations is what? Well, results, right? Everything that an organizational does is conditional upon delivering results at the end of the day. This is really the be-all, end-all theme. And this is what makes studying organizational behavior different from just daily behavior. You can't say, I just practice these great 5 behaviors in life, but they deliver no results at work. It's not going to end well in a business organization if you do something that ultimately doesn't lead to some sort of result for the organization.
So what you need to do is you really have to understand, what is the organization? How does it work? Like we said, what's the culture? What's the structure? What do we do? Employees, what kind of employees do we have? This type, that type, coworkers, bosses, customers. And then put all of these variables together to operate the highest level from a purely results point of view. That represents organizational behavior. So general behavior in life is nice, but in OB, you need to have results, and those results are not that easy to obtain. Now look at this picture to the right, given how many variables we have. So basically, not not to sound clever, but good luck managing behavior in organizations successfully with so many variables. And one is turned this way, like that photo, one is turned the other. With so many variables at play without some training in psychology work. Now, you think you were done? No, there comes the coronavirus. And coronavirus is first like, ha, 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 and then we have a panic, and you have all the variables, and now you have these external threats, and just about you think you're done with all of this with corona, you get, bam, the Dow tanked. Now what do we do? So now you're going to tell me that your behavior at home is the same as behavior in organizations, that the constraints are the same and the variables are the same? No, they're not. You really got to study that a little more to basically be effective at all. Otherwise, you're just doing guesswork.
Mm-hmm.
Purpose of an OB. Well, why should you take the class? Like OB is, by the way, just quickly, it's offered the most. It's almost always number 1 and number 2 with finance in terms of classes offered along the theme of OB or their themes. And it's offered in just about any business schools. I mean, I'm not saying it is, but if you look at it very quickly, you can go to Big 10 schools and Ivy Leagues and you will see every single one offers OB in their in their MBA programs for sure. I'm not talking about undergrad because some of these schools don't have undergrad. So our job is to make your job easy. How? Well, you take this class, we give you a little bit of the tools to put you in your tool chest books and box, and hopefully you reduce the guesswork in fostering evidence-based study and application of OB.
I think another way to think about this is, would you send someone into surgery who didn't go to medical school? Or would you board a plane with a pilot who didn't go to pilot school? So no training in managing people at work is really not okay either. Many companies are instituting some training for their first line managers. Did you want to tell them about this example?
Yeah, I was just recently reading an interview with a head of HR in Novartis, and he was talking about some of these topics. He said we were doing something, and we discovered in an in-house survey that 70% of our first time and first line managers had no management training. Now, this is his example. He's like, this is like throwing a person who doesn't know how to swim into the water, like this person here. And I have a full site for him later on the slide. You will see it. Says basically, here's what happens: they throw you in, and you start swimming, and you might look funny. You look like a puppy, or you kind of trying, you're gasping for it. And some people drown, metaphorically speaking. They can't make it, right? Some make it on the other end, but they really look funny. Kind of like, whoa, man, that was not how you do it, right? But you get lucky. And then depends who's on the other end. If it's somebody supportive, they might say, okay, that was really funny, but sure, come on, keep on doing it. Then you do it the next time, hopefully get a little better, and somehow, through experience, hitting your head against the wall, you kind of start learning what to do. Well, how effective is that versus taking an OB class? Take an OB class, you're going up, you're this perfect swimmer. At least it will give you some training, some education, some sense of how to do this. And whoever tells you that's not important, that's really so irksome, because in these examples that Kayla had, I don't know, a surgeon can hurt one person at a time, but a terrible manager can hurt hundreds of people at the same time by stupid decisions. So how is training not important when we're dealing with organizations, with people, with hundreds of them, with their families, their income? How in the world is that not important? Of course it's important. So training, I don't think I need to talk more to make a case as to why training is important.
So ultimately, OB gives us the source of competitive advantage. So there's many sources, right? As you typically talk about in your classes.
Click it. So think about it. Is there anybody who hasn't heard of efficiency, scale, quality in IT? I mean, you open any book on economics, however they call it, it's like, well, the reason for creating organizations is to organize. And to organize really means be more efficient, right? And of course, it makes perfect sense that you want to be more efficient. I mean, you want to get more of the same or same with less. Sure, absolutely. And then scale come, right? I mean, of course, unit cost as accountants would be, everybody's competing on unit cost. You ask any accountant, what's your name? Unit cost. Okay, what's your middle name? Unit cost. So scale, absolutely. Can you scale it up? And if you scale it up, you reduce the cost. And then, so mergers, acquisitions, right? That was the deal there in around 1960s, 1970s. 70s and 80s, Edward Deming competing on quality. Is basically everybody's competing on something. The previous one is you're competing on cost. Quality is depending on quality. The idea is the quality can bring premium pricing. Philip Patek or what was their airline? Emirates, I think, that are really, really high end. And the idea there is there are people who will pay premium for a quality product. So kind of like for every, I don't know, Tesla, there is, not to name anybody on the other end. And then these days, IT, anything, iPhones this, iPhones that. We recently had a student, she was the supervisor of elevator mechanics. And they always used to do it the old ways, which is you go out, you check the elevator, you write the order, you get the parts in. And now they have to do it on the spot on the iPhones, and a lot of them don't even, let's just say they're not enjoying it. So That's kind of, I don't know, is there a company out there that doesn't know this? I mean, if you don't, then I don't know, you should be in business. How many are really familiar with effective OB practice, right? We'll talk quite a bit about it. Well, not that many. Well, a lot of it, OB was not really offered in, well, maybe last 20, 30 years. But before that, it was kind of sketchy. Who knows? People were not trained into that. And then, but if you just think about it, which sources of competitive advantage do you think are harder to copy by the competitors? Economics that everybody knows about, or certain psychological ones? Let's say you set the goals, you build confidence, efficacy, and then you reinforce them properly. Which one is easier to copy? But of course, it's not. So OB could be, I believe, a serious source of competitive, and I think all of our students are pretty much selling this, especially in the executive MBA programs. So I think this wraps it up for us. Again, I'm kind of winging it here, but the idea was to introduce the field, to give folks a little bit of what the field is, how do we go about it. Hopefully, people find it useful. Now, if you go from, so for example, the way we teach, the way I teach. So I give introduction to OB, and then I focus on work motivation and leadership, for example. But different faculty, different schools can focus on different things, right? Some might focus on the theories of procedural justice. Some might do distributive or equity theory. Some might do the leadership part of it, a little more on that or not. Some might focus on the perceptions, right? So different folks, a little on personality. That could be several classes. So from here, this is the field. It's a pretty big field. And then different faculty go by either what they believe is important, or what they believe is important for the audience, or what they were trained in, or what their advisor used to do, which is why when you say I took OB, you can have so many different topics, versus I took calculus, and 80% of us kind of agree as to what happened where they're in that class, right? They even use same examples. So that's then, so if I were to teach this, I would go now off of this, here's what work motivation is all about, and here's how leadership ties into it. But different people can have different topics. So thank you for listening.
If you have any questions about any of the information we covered today, here's our contact information. You can find our emails on the right. Feel free to also leave a comment on this video cast, and we'll check it. We can circle back there as well. So thank you very much.